Hi. PERKONS from Erica Synths is a hybrid analog and digital 4-voice drum synth, and also a drone synth, that takes hands-on controls to the extreme, giving you per-voice tone and sequencing controls. It's more expensive, more simplified, and more focused than other drum machines, but does have a character that makes it sound different. In this video, I'll explore what makes it tick, its different voice engines, as well as pros and cons compared to other drum synths. I've also created a large sample pack of it. I'll link to it in the description so you can explore its timbres up close. Before I start, a quick disclosure: I got PERKONS directly from Erica Synths, and it cost me substantially below retail, but as always, they have no say over the content of this video. This channel is funded by viewers who subscribe to my content and book updates on Patreon, YouTube Premium and ads, and price check affiliate links in the description, which help the channel regardless of the product you choose to buy. Okay, let's start with an overview. PERKONS is a hybrid analog and digital drum synth. It has 4 voices, each with a digital sound engine, an analog multi-mode filter and drive, and then a digital bucket brigade delay circuit with effects sends from each of the voices, and finally a master compressor. Each of the digital engines has 3 algorithms, which you select with these switches, and then 3 modes for every algorithm, which are a variation of the algorithm. Generally speaking, each of the algorithms in each of the voices is different, but there's some overlap with a couple of algorithms in these 2 voices. There are no hard rules as to which voice does what, but generally speaking, voices 1 and 2 have an emphasis on sounds that begin with a pitch envelope, so you could say they're better suited for kicks and toms, but they're also great tonal synths with various sound engines, including wavefolding, wavetable, virtual analog, FM, and crossmod. Voice 3 has snare, kick, and tom engines, as well as a carpless strong engine. And finally, voice 4 has a range of noise, hat, and cymbal sounds. PERKONS is predominantly a drum synth, but by turning the decay knob all the way right, you can drone and tune any of its oscillators, not chromatically currently, but you can tune them by ear in relative intervals to each other. On the sequencing and modulation side, each voice gets its independent 16-step sequencer. These can sequence triggers, but also automation or parameter locks for each of the parameters, knobs, and switches on a per-voice basis. So each step can be wildly different from the next if you take the time to automate enough parameters. There are various playback options for each of the 4 tracks, and there's a master LFO that can be sent with different mod depths to all of these parameters here on a per voice basis. Each sequencer in each pattern is up to 16 steps, so you can sequence shorter patterns, and you can chain patterns as long as the total step length isn't more than 64. PERKONS doesn't have a screen, but I guess you can sort of treat this 4x16 grid as kind of like a low-res touchscreen, because it has a few modes. So obviously in this mode, we're sequencing steps on the sequencer, but we can also go into kit mode to swap kits. And there are a few other views. For example, shift lets you select the different grooves and relative playback modes and speeds. Mod lets you select the modulation depth for the LFO as it's sent to each of these parameters at each of these mod depths. Then, just like you can select different kits, you can also select different patterns. And patterns can either load with or without kits. So after you've loaded a pattern, you can just swap out its kit if you like. Many of these shifts and combos are self-explanatory and labeled on the panel, but some aren't. There aren't that many of those, though. As I was reading through the manual, I took note of all the shortcuts, and here they are. So not too bad. I'll put a copy of this for download on my Patreon, but you can just pause this video and take a screenshot and print it if you're not a member. Let's take a look at connectivity in the back. PERKONS is entirely mono. There are no panning options. Each of the voices and the master has a single mono output, as well as a headphone output in mono. There's a send and return to replace the master bucket brigade effect with a different effect. I'll show you this later, with a different external effect, as long as it's mono if you want to feed it back into the compressor. PERKONS has MIDI in and out for clock sync and triggering the individual voices. At least as of this firmware, you cannot play the voices chromatically using MIDI or using the tune knobs, but you can have them triggered either by different notes on the same channel or different channels. The SD card slot is used for firmware updates and saving kits and patterns. You can store, by the way, and immediately access 64 banks of 64 kits and patterns. So here I'm accessing the individual patterns and kits in the current bank. If I hold Shift and Kit, then I go into the bank select view. It takes a few seconds to swap banks, and we're done. So you can't have a pattern running when you swap out a bank, but once you're in a bank, both patterns and kits swap out immediately. Each voice has a trigger input and audio output, if you want to send it to an effect or stereo effect or just process it separately, and an effect send and return if you want to bypass the internal delay but still use the compressor. Finally, on the left, you also have analog clock in and out. So that's it for the overview. Let's dive in a little bit deeper and start with the different sound algorithms or sound engines for each of the voices. Since you've got 3 algorithms and 3 modes for each algorithm, there are potentially 9 different sound engines for each of the 4 voices, so potentially 36 sound engines in total. They're not labeled any differently on the panel. Unfortunately, it would have been nice if there was some sort of icon or squiggle next to these switches. So there's no choice to either memorize them or reference the manual. This is sort of the layout for the algorithms, modes, and controls on a per voice basis. Generally speaking, with some exceptions, these 6 knobs are identical for each of the voices. So tune and decay, and then a filter cutoff. There's a multi-mode filter, so anywhere from high pass to band pass to low pass. And then drive, which I always keep pretty high. And finally, an effects send to the bucket brigade delay. And a level control. And then the knobs that do something different for each algorithm are the Param 1 and Param 2 knobs. For these 2 voices, Param 2 is, I think, typically almost always a pitch envelope. So that's easy to remember. Then Param 1 changes the sound's timbre. So let's take a quick listen to the different algorithms on voice 1. These are best heard probably if I open up decay, and drive does have impact obviously, and the cutoff. I'll just keep those off to begin with. Anyway, so this is a wave folder with different modes here. These are transient modes. Snap changes the transient at the beginning of the sound. The second algorithm is a wavetable synth. This is wavetable 1. You can obviously pitch it and then surf through the waveform using the Param 1 knob. Wavetable number 2. I think there's some modulation going on here, maybe in addition to just surfing the wavetable. And wavetable number 3. So those are the waveforms. Let's take a listen in a percussive context. So I think a lot of PERKONS' character comes from these percussive wavetable drums. Anyway, that's algorithm 2, and then algorithm 3 is called simple drum. with simple shapes. So sine, saw, and square. So that, in a nutshell, is voice 1. Let's move on to voice number 2. Algorithm 1 in voice 2 is also a full drum, but they're a bit different. In voice 1, you control the wave folding just manually. In voice 2, it modulates fold based on the decay envelope. Now you could modulate fold or wavetable surfing or anything else using the LFO, but that's a nice touch for the fold drum here compared to here. Here too, you have control over the transient, none, noise, and pulse. Algorithm 2 is a wavetable drum. As far as I could tell, it's identical to voice 1. It would be nice maybe if they applied the decay envelope to the surf position as well here. And then algorithm 3 is a complex drum. So a lot of cross mod options here. I haven't played around with the filtering, by the way, but obviously when you apply, say, a band pass or high pass to these or anything else, the sound changes completely. When you start to bring in the pitch envelope and drive, quite a few timbres hidden here as you play with the different frequencies of the crossmod oscillators. Plenty of these and more in my sample pack. Let's move on to voice 3. Let's start with algorithm 1. We've got noise and tone control. Now here, obviously, filtering means a lot. So the filter's wide open here. Low pass filter, band pass would make this sound very different. Not to mention a high pass filter. Anyway, that's the snare algorithm. Let's take a listen to the kick. Again, fully open. So certainly a nice kick, but if you ask why would we need a kick on voice 3 when we have voices 1 and 2, I think this can come in handy if you want to use 1 and 2 as a synth. Drive opens it up. So nice range there for the kick. And for the noise / tone drum, mode 3. So yeah, nice range there. Again, can be filtered extensively. All of these can be modulated with the LFO too. We'll get to that. And then for algorithms 2 and 3, this is slap and this is car plus. The modes don't make a difference here, at least not yet, not in this firmware. So let's take a listen to these. The slap algorithm has this kind of spring reverb on it. with or without crunch. And of course, you've got drive and frequency controls. All this was with a bandpass filter. Let's move into low pass to hear the entire range. Okay, that's algorithm 2, and then carpless. Let's try without drive. Param 1 is called Edge. And Param 2 is Twang. So that's voice 3. Let's move on to voice 4, noise hat, noise tone, and acoustic hats. Let's take a listen to these clean, first with a filter wide open. Algorithm 1, mode 1. Timbre controls, decay. Attack. So quite different controls here. With hi-hats, of course, filtering plays a major role as well. So that's algorithm 1, mode 1. Let's move on to mode 2. Different character of noise here, or cross mod. Compared to mode 1. And then mode 3. Again, here filtering does a lot. So that's algorithm 1. Let's listen to algorithm 2. I'm beginning to feel a little bit like Hector Salamanca making this video, but all in the service of listening to this drum machine. I think here, at least for now, modes 2 and 3 don't do much in algorithm 2. Let's listen to algorithm 3. So this, I think, is sample based. It's called acoustic hats. Sounds like a sample to me, with 3 different samples. Of course, these can be filtered. And then Param 1 here is cool. It's like a bit crush. Of course, filtered differently. So those are more or less the voices for Perkons. Let's move on to the Bucket Brigade delay section. Like I mentioned earlier, you've got an effects send for each of the voices. So the delay has, let's send it to the delay. Things you'd expect. Feedback controls. And time. With 3 color options. And actually, if you go into the settings, so if you hit Shift and Mod, and these settings aren't labeled, so we'll need to look at the manual for this. Vintage BBD, so this is the one we want to toggle on and off. So, before and after. delay has its own LFO. So if you turn up mod depth, you can get different modulation effects for the delay. Let's try this at really fast rates. So that's the delay. Let's take a listen to the compressor on a few patterns that I've programmed here. Let's maybe start with a simple one. So you need to set both threshold and the compressor amount. I'll try to gain match these, but definitely hear the noise there. Okay, let's move on to external effects. I've got Torso T1 here doing the sequencing with this pattern, and let's maybe focus this over here. So there's velocity control when you've got external MIDI control. So PERKONS responds to MIDI velocity. And if you like, you can also control PERKONS parameters with MIDI CCs, as well as clock if you like, but we're just going to be doing all the sequencing from here. Anyway, here's how I have the effects set up. I've got golden verb picking up the output of channel 3 directly. When I do that, channel 3 is excluded from the internal signal chain, and I can apply external effects to it. So if you like, you can record the individual output of each of the channels separately or apply different effects to them. Then the second thing you can do with effects here is replace the entire Bucket Brigade delay circuit with an external effect. So I've got Rattler here plugged to the master send effect and then sending audio back into the return in the back. And the result is, let's just mute these channels, say go for this kick. So this drive can go far, but only go so far. And through Rattler, it does this. So without and with. And I can apply this to other channels as well as a send. Again, through this fairly noisy Rattler, but nice distortion effect. And same goes for this, or do it to multiple channels at once. So that is how you use both a master effect and process any of the channels separately. The only caveat is that any stereo effect can't be brought in back to the mono PERKONS. Rather, it needs to be mixed in stereo later in the signal chain. So that's more or less the top half of PERKONS. Let's talk about the sequencing and the bottom half or third. You set the tempo using this knob on the left. And if you want to set the exact tempo, you hit shift and turn the knob and you can see the hundreds, tens, and ones. And you can also set this manually. So that's tempo. You sequence by dropping steps. On the sequencer, you can mute tracks, by the way, by holding shift and pressing the trigger key. In terms of track playback, you've got a few interesting options. You've got shuffle and a few other options per track. Divide, multiply, groove, and play modes. Let's maybe add these hats here. So on a per voice basis, you could set the relative speed of a track by holding Shift and then choosing either to divide or slow down, in this case the hats, and speed them up. Then you've got groove controls. So maybe lower the kick a bit. This applies various velocity patterns. You've got 3 of these, A, B, and C, and then there's random. Then finally you've got 4 play modes: forward, backwards, ping pong, and random. So let's maybe unmute this track. Let's say set a number of steps to 5. So we're only going through these 5 steps. This is forward, and then backwards for this track. Ping pong. Maybe let's do this here. Random, so Shift, play mode, random, and then you choose the track. Now we're going through these randomly. So cool stuff for the different play modes and speeds. A few more sequencing options. On a per step basis, you can add ratchets and odds and probabilities. Let's start with ratchets. So the way you add ratchets is, let's maybe set a last step here, so we only get 4 steps of hats. And here the step is sort of like the Shift key. So you hold a step, then select ratchets in this case, which was selected, but let's go for ratchets. Then you choose either 2x, 3x, 4x, or 5x. Okay, so 2x on this step, 3x, 4x, and 5x, or nothing. So that's how you set ratchets. And then odds and probabilities, you can only have one of these at a time. First step is to hold a step. Let's say hold the ratchets step, and then choose probability, which is simple. You've got 10%, 25, 50, or 90. So now this step will only play 25% of the time, 50% of the time, 90%, or 10%. So almost no ratchets. And then odds are the 1 every option. So 1 every 2 loops, as you can see here, 1 every 3 loops, every 4 loops. So maybe turn these off. Okay, 1 every 4 loops. Then the second odds option is shown here in this column. So 2 out of 3 loops, 3 out of every 4, 4 out of 5, and 7 out of 8. So those are odds, probabilities, and ratchets, using these buttons here and the labels on top of the buttons. There are a few other hidden combos. For example, Shift, we already talked about this, will mute tracks. And then Shift Shuffle and holding one of these voice tap keys will repeat it. And then finally, if you want, you can just play live into the pattern. So hit record. And bad playing is quantized, but on the other hand, there's no micro timing support here. So that's how you sequence triggers. Let's talk about automating these various parameters so you can record knob motions. Let's maybe go back and set a last step here so we get more of a pattern. Anyway, hit record and say we wanted to automate the decay of the hi-hats. It's as simple as that, or maybe the carpless strong. And if you want, you can also lock parameters just by holding a step and turning knobs. Let's maybe mute a few of the tracks and just listen to this one. So say if I wanted the pitch of this step to be higher, I just hold it and change the pitch. Unfortunately, currently there's no way to preview this as you make the change. So you have to wait a loop cycle. One sort of workaround that I saw for this is just to set a pattern to have just the length of one step. And then parameter lock its tone the way you want, say pitch. And then you can copy and paste steps. Holding a step and record is copy, and then holding it and shift will paste it. And if you wanted, you could take it to the extreme. So let's say we just turn these off and make this an entirely different sound. So let's hit play here, change the algorithm, change the everything, the filter. Yeah, and get an entirely different sound here. Maybe an effect send. And notice this isn't getting sent and this is. There's one more sequencing option, which is accents. You have to enable that. So you go into Shift, Settings, and it's in the manual. After a while, you just remember it. Anyway, if you turn on accent mode, then as you go back to sequence now, when you press a new step, you'll have two options. So either a dimly lit step or a normally lit step for either with an accent or without an accent. I prefer to just turn this off, and it's easy to do once you, like I said, remember where it's at. Let's move on to the last piece of the puzzle, which is the LFO. To demonstrate this, I'll just maybe open this up. So let's say we wanted to modulate this parameter with the LFO. So we hit mod, or LFO in this case, and now per voice, we can choose the destination and then the mod depth for that parameter. So let's turn up the decay here so we can hear it. Maybe not that loud to begin with. So we're looking for, say, param 1. So we'll go for voice 2, param 1, and then set a mod depth. And we need to turn on the overall mod level here. So this is sort of like a overall global control for all the modulation. And this is the mod depth for the individual parameter. If you wanted to, say for example, also modulate the pitch of this voice, we choose again, voice 2, tune, and choose a mod depth. More, less, and then global mod depth. So that's basically how the LFO works for all of these parameters for all of the voices at a mod depth that you choose. So within the context of this pattern. And we could apply it to anything. Let's say you wanted to go for make it a bit less extreme. Say the hats. That's this line over here. Go to decay, choose a mod depth. You have a few LFO shapes. The LFO shape on the panel, by the way, might not always represent what's in the kit because it's saved with the kit. Notice the decay is getting longer with the shape of the LFO. We can make it much slower. So decay increases with the LFO. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for PERKONS. On the pros side, and this is of course a matter of taste, I think it does have a character that other drum synths don't. For lack of a better term, I think it's industrial and rough. And it's not that other drum machines don't have their character. I just think this one's a bit different, and I think PERKONS lives up to its thunderous name. Another major pro, I think, is the simplicity of the interface. It's not exactly knob per function, and yes, there are some shift shortcuts you need to memorize, but overall I think things are laid out very nicely. It's definitely refreshing to see the position and value of every knob and have it immediately accessible instead of shifting around for different tracks to play with the sequence or the parameter values. Obviously, when you change kits, then the knobs don't reflect parameter values. But a quick nudge to every knob and switch, and you're quickly back in control. I don't know about you, having everything laid out certainly reduces the mental overload of pressing shift to move from track to track, and then the knob positions no longer reflect anything again. Though on the flip side, other synths may have more than just 4 tracks or more than just 11 parameters per voice. Another big pro for PERKONS is that, like Electron machines, you can automate and parameter lock any voice parameter on a per step basis. So even though you've only got 4 voices, you can make it feel like a machine that can play more than just 4 different timbres per track if you parameter lock enough parameters on a per step basis. Finally, analog connectivity is excellent if that's important to you, with dedicated outputs, sends, and returns, and even analog triggers on a per voice basis, as well as for the master effect. So that does give you a lot of flexibility to change the character and to add character to this. On the cons side, price-wise, PERKONS is on the high end compared to other drum machines. Of course, if you deem its sound character as something you can't get anywhere else, then there is no competition, but ultimately there is some overlap, and there are certainly other drum machines that have a broader timbral range, even if it is different. The names that come to mind if you're interested in drum synths as opposed to samplers are drum machines like Model Cycles, TR6S, 8S, Syntakt, and Analog Rhythm, all of which have more than 4 tracks, more effects, even more parameters per drum synth, support longer sequences, they're in stereo as opposed to the mono PERKONS, and generally speaking, they have more features. Now, if you add sample-based drum machines to the list, the competition becomes even stiffer. PERKONS doesn't support user samples. It may have a few over here, but it isn't really what this machine is about. So I think it's really about whether the character, form factor, and simplicity of PERKONS appeals to you, as opposed to the other cheaper and more feature-rich options with a more complex interface typically, though. Now, if it does appeal to you, I have a few wishlist features that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully we'll see in firmware updates things that this can't do as of this firmware. One of the things that is most missing for me is the ability to tune the drums chromatically or according to a scale using the knobs or using external MIDI. The virtual analog wavetable, wavefold, and crossmod engines here sound great, but it's just too much work to parameter lock tune them by ear if you want to program in melodies. At least for me, you can if you want. Another thing I think would be extremely useful here is a sound pool per voice. So right now we have kits, so you can quickly swap out sounds, but it's all 4 sounds in a kit at once. It would be nice, maybe say if you hit kit and one of these buttons, you'd have access to presets. I actually did this as part of the process of making the sample pack for this video. So in this bank, I've got my voice 1 sounds, and then if I hit kit over here, then I have immediate access to all 64 sounds in this bank. The thing is, the way it is now, they're organized per kit as opposed to individual sounds. It would be nice to just pick a sound from here and then put it on various steps in the sequence. Basically like sound locks on Electron gear. Now, you can do this today, you just need to do it manually for every step or copy steps around. A per voice pool would just make this a lot easier. Then finally, definitely it's a pro in terms of simplicity that PERKONS doesn't have a screen, but that does put an upper limit on what can be added in terms of firmware update before things get a little bit too shifty. It would certainly have been nice to have different icons that represent the different algorithms and potentially modes. I've been using this pretty much every day for a couple of weeks, and only now I'm beginning to sort of remember that algorithm 2 is wavetable and this is wavefold, but it takes a while. So that's it for PERKONS. Check out my Mega PERKONS sample pack and cheat sheet available to the people who support this channel on Patreon, along with my book, of course. Hit like if this was useful, ring the bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.